A description of the world. Entry for the 7th day of the 5th month in the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls. I am determined to explore as much of the world as I can in my lifetime. To this end, I have traveled as far as the 960th hall to the west, the 890th hall to the north, and the 768th hall to the south. I have climbed up to the upper halls where clouds move in slow procession and statues appear suddenly out of the mists. I have explored the drowned halls, where the dark waters are carpeted with white water lilies. I have seen the derelict halls of the east, where ceilings, floors, sometimes even walls, have collapsed, and the dimness is split by shafts of gray light. In all these places, I have stood in doorways and looked ahead. I have never seen any indication that the world was coming to an end, but only the regular progression of halls and passageways into the far distance. No hall, no vestibule, no staircase, no passage is without its statues. In most halls they cover all the available space, though here and there you will find an empty plinth, niche, or apse, or even a blank space on a wall otherwise encrusted with statues. These absences are as mysterious in their way as the statues themselves.
Hello and welcome to Raise a Glass, the podcast where we discuss the stories and storytellers that shape us. I am Hunter Danson.
And I am Eric Lintela.
And we are going to be talking mostly about Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which Eric has brought to us and I've read. And but before we get there, Eric, what's in your glass?
Hunter, we are recording this podcast on St. Patrick's Day, so there's no more appropriate approach than a pint of Guinness.
Very good.
Sláinte. Hunter, what is in your glass tonight?
Well, I have not a Guinness, but I have a Zero Gravity Conehead India Pale Ale. One of those classic IPAs that tastes like a tree, as it should.
You say that like that's a good thing.
Yes, in my mind, an IPA does not taste like juice.
Okay.
It tastes like a tree.
And that's good. Trees are good to eat.
Yes, I like
Drink.
trees.
Okay. See, I like the sap of trees, but, you know.
Yeah. Here you go. So, what are you raising and pouring your Guinness for this week?
Well, Hunter, they're going to be connected for me this week. I have, as you may know, my background is in economics and religious studies, right? That intersection of faith and the world, which as I've grown, as I've gotten older, experienced more things, I'm realizing necessitates a conversation around justice and the church. And the things that the church in particular has to bring to the conversations, whether it be around justice or reconciliation, truth, hope, development. And I think that's for a long time led me to Martin Luther King Jr. And other truly, great writers and orators and communicators. And led me to want to be with and follow and learn from individuals that I see putting their orthodoxy into orthopraxy, their faith into action. And I recently, very late to the game, have come across or finally had it recommended to me for the large enough time, to check out the works of John Perkins, who was a civil rights leader in the 60s. Pastor, helped launch Christian Community Development Association, the CCDA, which is just an incredible organization, and a leader in conversations on race, reconciliation, justice, forgiveness, and love. And they just the first work of his that I'm walking into, and I am fairly certain that a future episode will involve a larger conversation around Dr. John Perkins. But I've recently been working through on Libby, and I'm almost done his book Dream With Me, which is the last book that he wrote. And so I'm raising a glass to John Perkins and pouring one out because he passed away. It was either today or yesterday. He's been on the doorstep of heaven for a couple weeks now, and we will get to celebrate with him when it's our turn as well. But I am sad that it's taken me this long to directly be impacted by John Perkins. Indirectly, I've been impacted by John Perkins since the first time I heard anybody talking about helping without hurting and talking about Christian community development. Which is just years and years in my life. So that's my raise and my pour. The sadness of him leaving and the celebration of his life and what God has done and will continue to do in and through him, and his witness. How about you, Hunter?
Well, I am raising a glass to Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. I don't know if you've heard of these. It's a series of graphic novels that we've been getting from the library, where there's a sort of, the concept is that Nathan Hale is a spy who's going to be hanged, and in order to prevent his hanging, he tells stories to the hangman and the British official who are hanging him, and they're about U.S. history. And they're really well researched, really entertaining, like graphic novels about famous people in history. And the one I'm raising a glass to this week is the one that he did on Harriet Tubman.
Okay.
She is so badass. Like, it is incredible when you actually read her story. And like, I know who Harriet Tubman is and what she did, but just to be able to experience it and really imagine, what her life was like, and just how much danger she took on, going back and back and back and back. And she was an abductor, which means in the Underground Railroad, an abductor was somebody who went basically beyond where the Underground Railroad was and kind of spread the message and made first contact with enslaved peoples who were trying to get free. So it was like the most dangerous job.
Yeah.
And she had narcolepsy too, which was crazy. So she would just like fall asleep and like have visions and talk to God and then come back. And she never lost anyone. And she never got caught. It's amazing. So raising a glass to those, I'd highly recommend checking out the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales. They have great bibliographies in the back, all illustrated, and it's great.
Okay.
And this doesn't happen often that I have things I could pour one out for, but I'm in a space right now where I don't want to indulge my bitterness.
I get that.
So I am also going to raise a glass to Jamie Dupuis, who is a Canadian musician.
Okay.
He has a YouTube channel that I first discovered where he does harp guitar songs. Some of the most famous, harp guitar. It is, if you haven't seen it, like, please just look it up. It is the coolest thing. It's a guitar, normal guitar, but then it has this whole other part where there's these huge like bass strings on it,
Oh, cool looking.
like a lute kind of.
What?
And he does these. He does original music, and he also does these covers of famous songs where he does the harp guitar, so he can like hit the bass notes on the harp part and have it ring out.
Oh my goodness. Why don't I
Sometimes
know
there's
this
like a
instrument?
low bass harp, and then there's a higher harp part, and it's the arrangements are amazing. So yeah, I'd highly recommend those. They're very lovely to listen to. But I also purchased his creative fingerstyle guitar course,
Okay.
and it's been filling in so many gaps in my guitar knowledge because I'm a self-taught guitarist. So no one ever told me like, these are the scales you should know, these are the chords you should know, these are the chord shapes. And it's like I had some music theory from band in high school playing clarinet, but it didn't really transfer that well, and I wasn't too disciplined about it. But the course, I've been going through the course, and I've just been like, oh, like making all these connections. I'm like, why didn't I learn this 6 years ago? I don't know. But yeah, so Jamie Dupuis.
Okay. Definitely worth looking up the guitar harp. I just looked it up. Very cool. Okay, Hunter, let's get into this conversation.
So, just like this guitar course is helping me navigate the labyrinth of the fretboard,
Yes.
we are going to be talking about a labyrinth in a book.
A labyrinth, 3 labyrinths, actually.
3 labyrinths.
Maybe 4. It's probably going to be one of our... No, I won't say that because then people won't listen. I was going to say it's probably going to be one of our harder to understand and follow. Creating inside jokes just by reading more of the same things. Do you want me to start? Or...
Yes.
All right.
I think, Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Tell us about it.
Let me start by giving us a brief overview of the story of Piranesi from Piranesi's own words. We started the episode with a description of the world as read by him, but this is what Piranesi has to say. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. Outside the house, there are only the celestial objects, sun, moon, and stars. The house has 3 levels. The lower halls are the domain of the tides. Their windows, when seen from across a courtyard, are gray-green with the restless waters and white with the spatter of foam. The lower halls provide nourishment in the form of fish, crustaceans, and sea vegetation. The upper halls are, as I have said, the domain of the clouds. Their windows are gray-white and misty. Sometimes you will see a whole line of windows suddenly illuminated by a flash of lightning. The upper halls give fresh water, which is shed in the vestibules in the form of rain and flows in streams down the walls and staircases. Between these 2, largely uninhabitable, levels are the middle halls, which are the domains of birds and of men. The beautiful orderliness of the house is what gives us life. Piranesi is an individual who lives in the house and is a self-described, what is he? He's a scientist and an explorer. And this is his story written as journal entries, reminiscent to me of the style of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Dr. Frankenstein, and many of the, I think the books of the 19th and 18th centuries, 18th and 19th centuries. Not every book by any means, but and it reminds me of that type of style of literature, and He is writing in a world, it's a fantasy story, where there are 15 people that he knows of. He is one of only two living. There is him and the other. And he is writing this story as a series of journal entries to the mythical 16th person.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a story primarily about Piranesi discovering more about himself and the other and the world that he is in. And to give more, I feel like would be improper at this particular moment.
Yes.
And the reason
I think we should give a pretty huge spoiler warning, because this is one of those books that's kind of like The Sixth Sense, where if you have it spoiled, I mean, I think it would still be a fun read, but not nearly as fun as, if you didn't know. So
this is, I would agree. I would actually highly recommend check out Piranesi. You can read it in just a few hours. It's I want to hear your thoughts on this, Hunter, but I think it's a type of book that once you get into it, it's hard to put down, and it's not a dense book. It reads pretty quickly. And I've now read through this book 3 times in the last 4 years, twice in the last 3 months, last 2 months.
Wow.
And so it does have, I think it has great rereadability, but the strength of it is in its first read.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to, this is your moment to pause. Pause us. Go read it. Yeah. Go listen to it on Libby or on Audible.
Turn on the radio in your car.
That's how I listened to it the first 2 times. I actually did an audio version of it. And then join us back. Okay, we're back. Thanks to those of you for whom this has been a multi-day journey with us already. For the much larger percentage of you who weren't going to read it no matter what we said. Hope you are still with us and enjoying the conversation. Hunter, I very purposely told you the order that you needed to read this book before you read the other ones. I also am hoping, and I know that you read this recently enough that you can give me your initial thoughts. I really, really want to know, before we get into any more of this discussion, before I share why this book has stuck to me and how it impacted me on a first read, what was your experience? Tell me your thoughts on this.
I enjoyed it. I was having fun. It felt to me almost like a mystery novel.
Okay.
I've read a couple Agatha Christie novels, and it was that same sort of like you're trying to put the clues together, figure out what's going on. But they never give you enough to actually connect all the dots until they want you to. And so yeah, I had a good time. My favorite part was probably the house itself. Just the concept.
We have to talk about the house.
Of the house with all the different statues and the atmosphere of the waves and the salty air and the silence, and that to me, I think the house itself is the strongest character in the book.
It is a character.
And what I will remember about it, I had some, I'm not sure how these reactions will be, but it's just maybe just because I'm aware of it, I kept thinking about paganism and how I feel like paganism is having a weird cultural moment where people are like, yeah, let's be pagan. And it's like, and I have, like, because there's some quotes. I'm not sure if this is something that you wanted us to get into later, but this idea of the way that you enter the house is you have to enter this like pre-rational state of mind according to the guy who discovered the house. It's a multiverse, the thing. So you step into it through some multiversal portal, and Matthew Rose we're in spoilers, so I don't want to say too much if you had plans, but like
so are you talking about the ritual or this pre?
Yeah. So the guy basically kidnaps Piranesi.
Okay, yes. So this is what I want to know. This is what I want to know, Hunter. What was your experience? What did you think when you realized what was actually happening in this story? That's what I want to get at this particular moment. There is a moment where it becomes very clear, and I'd be interested to know what that moment maybe was for you. But like, what was your response?
To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed because I wanted, like, I really liked the idea of the house. I liked the mystery. I wanted this to be like a myth, like a totally different place.
Okay.
And then in an instant, she connects it to our world, and it became less exciting to me.
Interesting. Okay.
And partly because I did not like the character of Lawrence Arnsales at all.
He's terrible.
He's an awful person, and I just don't really enjoy the sort of like charismatic, sort of like faux academic, whatever he is. I don't enjoy that trope.
Okay. Were you like disgusted or like, so there's a point we realize that like, a lot of people when reading this book, like this comes up, they're like, what happened? And like, it changes their view of the book as a completely. And what seemed really cool all of a sudden becomes like, ugh. And like, are they just so offended?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I never really trusted the other that much. I think leading up to it, I kind of felt like there's something weird with this guy. He was talking about the Shining device, and I was like, "Oh, that's a smartphone." And I caught that pretty early. And maybe I was like too prepared. I mean, I didn't look anything about the book up, but I knew for the way that you recommended it to me, and like I think I had another person recommend it to me a couple years ago. I knew there was some kind of big twist, and I was trying to figure it out. And yeah, I mean, what he did to Piranesi is pretty despicable. Kidnapping someone and erasing their memory. See, the thing is, I started wondering about the plot because I was like, well, if he could have. It seemed like how you got back is by walking through a door in the first vestibule. So I was like, why didn't he walk through the door when he was first kidnapped? Like, how did his memory go so quickly, But I realized, that's a conceit of the book. Otherwise, it wouldn't work.
Well, he couldn't because he hadn't... You can only enter this world if you enter this pre-rational thought, in which point multiple doors open up to you. And it's only at that point, and then you know which door to go through, that you can then find the way into and out of the house.
Okay.
So that is built into it. So he could smell it and hear it at different points, but he couldn't have just walked through and been back.
Right. Okay.
Okay, so that's. I wanted to get some of your initial thoughts on that, and we'll talk more, and we can hit more about the pre-rational thought along this. So one of the main reasons I brought this book to us in this conversation, Hunter, is I read this book for the first time, I don't know, about 4 years ago, so like a year or so after it came out, and actually a book club I was in with the previous guest on the show, our friend Jordan. Shout out to Jordan. And to my memory, most of the individuals, everybody else was like, "Oh my goodness!" This like became really like ugh, like different varies of like some people were super surprised, some people were not as surprised. Like there's clearly, it's very clear early on, like in the first 10 pages, that something's up, but you don't know what it is, and it's like it forces you, right? It is kind of that mystery. I read this book, and I found it cathartic, and just a wonderful journey. And like, not to say that there's not terrible things that happen. There are. But I had you read these stories in the opposite direction of the way I read them. So I read Piranesi after I'd read Borges and after that Hideous Strength. And so when I was reading this, like for whatever reason, I am not the type of person that picks up on things in books or movies or TV shows. We've talked about that before on this podcast, right? I like to experience it and not think ahead. Like everything in this was like, yeah, this makes sense. This is what's happening. Like it didn't necessarily surprise me. None of these moments surprised me, but they felt comforting to me, which is a weird thing. I've been told that would be my space. Now we'll get into a little bit later. I think that Piranesi's experience and with the house towards the end of the story kind of backs up my reading of it. But it's a story that has just stuck with me for 4 years. And because I see it brings together, at least in my reading, some of my favorite pieces. Or like, we've talked about the Library of Babel before. It's one of my favorite short stories ever. We've done Out of the Silent Planet, which is the first of the space trilogy. We hopefully are going to do Paralander at some point, or maybe we'll just do the entire space trilogy at once. So that Hideous Strength. It's, and the magician's nephew is quoted at the very beginning of this story. And so where this could be, and for probably most people is like a book that's wonderful and then terrible, and then you don't really know how you feel. I think the magic in this world is fantastic, and it's a story that is complete and is just given me comfort from the first time reading it on.
Is it the house itself that gives you comfort, or also the plot? Because I can understand enjoying the house and enjoying the world, and it's a place that you can go to in your mind. But then there's also the plot of a person, I guess, I don't know a more delicate way to put this, but a person being mind.
Nope.
Yes. Mind.
Yeah, no. Sorry,
yeah. And then, and he never recovers himself.
No, he does not.
Who he was before, which is interesting.
He becomes a third person by the end of the story. There's a person, Matthew Rose Sorensen, who he was before he enters the house. There's Piranesi, who he is mockingly called by the other, Ketterly. And then afterwards, he is a combination. He's not even just a combination of Piranesi and Matthew Rose Sorensen. He becomes a third person. Which, maybe to explicitly answer your question, the house itself, I think, is the biggest comfort for me. The idea of this world. I love fantasy worlds. I love exploring. When I play a video game, I don't care what the plot is. I just want to walk around and explore all the things. I don't look it up, even though it's more efficient to do that. And
hey, if you're playing a video game, why?
Why are you going for
trying to be efficient?
Yeah. We've talked about the Wheel of Time. One of the things I love so much about the Wheel of Time is the unnecessary addition of so many side quests. You can get time to just be in a world and kind of big. I loved a lot of Bollywood movies because they take the premise of like a rom-com and they add just another 3 to 5 scenes that are unnecessary and wouldn't be in a Hollywood movie, but they turn it from being an hour and a half long movie to a 2.5 hour long movie, just because they've added more of the scenes that were clearly cut out of the Hollywood version of it. And this is a world that you can just explore around. And I also think a part of what I really like is the character interaction. Not because it's necessarily positive. Now, I'll say the main character, Piranesi, I think he's a very likable character in this story. I actually, in this read, wrote multiple times, like really likable, or like, I appreciate, he's just so kind. But the reason I had us read that Hideous Strength is I think even the evil characters, clearly like the scientific or pseudoscientific or whatever manipulative characters, I think in my brain, those characters need to exist in order to uplift the counteractive element. I think part of what makes this story strong and Piranesi such an interesting character and the house such a respectable place is the clear addition of the other. And I mean that both in terms of the character and in terms of like the grand other entering into it.
Yeah.
We've now talked for a lot. No. We've now said quite a bit without saying anything to somebody who hasn't read this book. But if you've made it to this podcast episode, you've stuck with us through thick and thin, and through much time. There's so many different ways we go this. Maybe a good way to start. You had an idea?
So, Eric, something I've heard you say is that you love being in the world and wandering around. Like it's a world that you could get lost in, the house, the labyrinth. Do you want to share more about that?
Yeah. So the premise of the house, or as Piranesi calls it towards the end of the book, the eternal house, is a labyrinth, is a space of rooms connected together by corridors that go on into forever.
Mm-hmm.
And from this perspective, as a kid, who wouldn't want to be in that space where you could just run around forever, get lost, and discover new things? Right? There's a childish part of me that's just like, this is the coolest space to be in, because you're constantly discovering, and you can say, oh, this is my favorite statue, I need to remember this space, and then you can go to the next one, oh, this is my new favorite statue. Now, like as an adult, there's some real terrifying pieces of that, right? Because it is a labyrinth, right? Yeah. I would not want my kids running around this space. Mm-hmm. And yet, in a fantasy world, as we think about these things, what is just how cool is it that Susanna Clarke took it a very, I don't know, in many ways a simple idea, it's like a room with a bunch of statues, and turned it into an infinite world with infinite possibilities. Mm-hmm. In the same way that the Library of Babel is an infinite labyrinth of, and I put this note years ago, it's an infinite labyrinth of hexagonal like rooms, which I called the infinite Catan board. Where you could just continue to discover, and you open up a book, and it's gonna in that library there's a combination of every single alphanumeric combination of letters together and blank spaces like possible, which makes it a practically infinite library, an infinite space. In fact, if you threw out 10 million books, you wouldn't lose any knowledge because there's an additional however many billion versions of those same books with only one letter different or a space different. Right. And this is before we even add the time element of it. That I just feel a little like childish and giddy with this idea. Is this interesting to you? Would you have fun in this?
You know, Eric, you've just done something for me that I haven't done for myself in a while. I think you've reminded me of this sense of wonder and the impulse that drove me to Lord of the Rings, to fantasy, and to, video games. Every time I'm, searching for something, that's what it is. And I think so often when I read now, I'm reading as a writer, trying to critique and to learn.
Okay.
And it can be hard for me to just enjoy it,
Yeah.
And I think that's a real gift that you have. And I really mean that as sincerely as possible. When I was reading this book, I actually almost wanted it to be a video game because it reminded me of The Outer Wilds.
Okay.
The game based on...
Tell me more about that.
Like exploration and discovery of a mystery. And there are statues in Outer Wilds too. And yeah, so I could definitely see, I would love to wander around in the house and exploring the infinite possibilities. And I think also it's so easy because we have so much media and Marvel with the multiverse. We're so familiar with the idea of infinity.
Yes.
But I don't think many of us would have really been able to come up with the idea of infinity if it hadn't been introduced to us as kids. It's like, if you actually sit around and think about it,
it means nothing.
It's I guess it's hard. You've helped me sort of recapture a sense of awe. So thank you.
Oh, I'm encouraged by that. Thanks for sharing that. It's such a beautiful part of fantasy. It's a reason fantasy exists. It's not that you can't get that in nonfiction and other space. I mean, you go outside and look at a sunset and you're going to feel that, right? But there is something about this entrance into a world. And when I enter this particular world, and we'll look at this in a different way a little bit later, when I enter into this world, I'm just trying to understand it within the world itself. And within the writings of the character. And Piranesi sees the house as a sense of awe. Through a sense of it's a provider. And we're going to talk about this from a different perspective a little bit later in the episode.
Yeah.
But before we get there, I want to as part of like the world searching as part of this, I want us to understand a little bit of the way this world works, because this is something that I find really interesting. And on my second and third reads, 3 or 4 years after reading it the first time, I paid special attention to it, and that's that in this world, there's a couple of things, and let me share about that.
Yeah, where did the statues come from?
Yes, that's what I say, and let me share about that in two parts. The first is how statues come to be. And there's a great example. And if you look on page 88, if you have the version I have, if you don't, then it'll be a different page. It's part 3, the first chapter, The Prophet. Entry for the 20th day of the 7th month in the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls. And then it's quite a few pages into it. It's a conversation between Arnsales, the prophet, and Piranesi. Page 89. Arnsales, the character who found this world, he says this. This is what I call a distributary world. It was created by ideas flowing out of another world. This world could not have existed unless the other world had existed first. Whether this world is still dependent on the continued existence of the first one, I don't know. It's all in the book I wrote. We skip ahead. We take it on towards the bottom of page 90. It starts with a question from Piranesi. Is this why there are statues, I ask? Is what why there are statues, he responded. Piranesi again. Do the statues exist because they embody the ideas and the knowledge that flowed out of the other world into this one? Oh, I never thought of that, he said, pleased. What an intelligent observation. Yes. I think that highly likely. Perhaps in some remote area of the labyrinth, statues of obsolete computers are coming into being as we speak. So the general philosophy or the idea of how statues come to exist is their thoughts. They're real things. They're from the world that you and I live in, that is drained like energy through into this just distributary world. Now there's some questions a little bit later, actually towards the very end of this book, that I think call into question whether that's fully true, because we see some Piranesi or Matthew Rose Sorensen, or the third character that he is, person he is, sees some people that he's seen in the house as statues, which I think adds some really great, wonderful questions. And I think that's part of fantasy. Part of a good story is unanswered questions. I don't like it when an author tells me the answer to all the questions. We've talked about this. Once a work is created, I'm interested to hear the author's thoughts. But if I can root it in the story itself, I think my thoughts are as accurate, or likely to be as accurate as somebody else's. Because the story, the piece, the medium's been completed. Not many people would argue with that, but that's how things are created in this world. And so that's kind of the first piece of that. But then within this world, and this is the other thing, the thing that I think is more interesting, or the piece that I think is more interesting, is that outside of humans and a dead monkey, there are water. There's water life. There's fish and crustaceans and yada yada. But then the only other thing is there's birds. We read later that there could be cats that are able to enter this world as well, but we never interact with a cat, which I think is a real loss. I think they named cats as being possible to enter this world. And it's confusing to me why he doesn't have a pet cat. I think that would have actually been a really cool addition if he'd had a cat with him. Just to give him somebody to talk to as well. But that's not the point here. The point is birds. And I'm looking now on page 42 and 43. Well, I'm looking now, page 41. This is in the chapter, A Conversation, entry for the 11th day of the 6th month in the year the albatross came to the southwestern halls. While ample for a brief neighboring exchange, such remarks, he's talking about birds at this point, do not suggest a broad or deep intelligence. Yet it has occurred to me that there may be more wisdom in birds than appears at first sight, a wisdom that reveals itself only obliquely and intermittently. That was page 39. We're going to skip ahead now to page 41. He shares a story where he saw birds alighting on specific statues, and he decides, because of that, to keep extra food, and he sees that as a warning. He said, "For the next 2 days, there were no fish at all, and if I had not attended to the bird's warning, I would have had hardly anything to eat. This experience led me to form a hypothesis. Perhaps the wisdom of birds resides not in the individual, but in the flock, the congregation. However, it is with this hypothesis in mind that I record something which happened this morning." This is truly ridiculous, right? If we're reading a nonfiction book, this person's straight crazy. And one could argue that maybe he is anyways. But page 42. He walks into a space, there's a bunch of birds. Very top of it, he says, "I'm paying attention," I called to them. "What is it that you wish to say?" Birds move. They alight on a statue of an angel blowing a trumpet, and then a statue of a ship that travels on little waves, and then a statue of a man reading from a large book, and then to a statue of a woman displaying a large dish or shield, and then a statue of a little child bowing its head to gaze at a flower which it holds in its hand, and then a statue of a sack of grain being devoured by a horde of mice, and then they fly off. He says, "Thank you," I called to them. "Thank you. Supposing my hypothesis to be correct, this is certainly the most elaborate communication that the birds have offered me. What is the meaning?" And then we go top of page 43. Third paragraph from the start of the next chapter. It says this: So this, as far as I can tell, is what the birds told me. A message from afar, obscure writing, innocence eroded. Interesting. I will allow some time to elapse, say a few months, and then I will examine this communication again and see if the intervening events can shed any light upon it, and vice versa.
Scientific paganism. Because he's doing an experiment.
He's doing an experiment.
Yeah.
But, like I said, we're going to talk about this from a different perspective a little bit later.
Yeah.
My perspective at it, as a reader of this book, without trying to think deeply about this, and we'll bring in that hideous strength later, which I think will prompt the conversation to be different and take on different species, is how interesting. What an interesting thing. I wonder if this is true. Within this world, within this particular character. Mm-hmm. And if you look at this message that they told him, a message from afar, obscure writing, innocence eroded. This is the story of the rest of the book. Mm-hmm. So what happens a little bit later is he receives a written message from Raphael, who is a police officer trying to find him to help him escape. He has no memory that he's Matthew Rose Sorensen. He's been abducted and been in this labyrinth, this house, for nearly 6 years. The other, Catterley, is the one that had abducted him and brought him to this space. But the other keeps tells Piranesi that 16, which is the name that Piranesi has made for Raphael, because he doesn't know anything about Raphael as a character. He just knows that there could be a mythical 16th person. The other is told Piranesi that 16 is hates reason and is there to kill them or to attack, not to kill, but to. The other ultimately shares with Piranesi that if 16 talks to Piranesi or communicates in any way, that Piranesi will end up hating the other and that the other will be forced to kill him. The other is truly a despicable character in the story. It's very fun to read how dislikable this person is, especially on a second and third read. because you can catch a lot of things that seem innocuous that are just utterly despicable from like the third page on. But the first time that Piranesi sees Raphael, is who you find out, this police officer, what her name is. The first time he sees her writing, he tries to block it. He tries to erase it. And so you end up with this piece. It's on page 141 and 142 of writing that, and I'll show you, Hunter. You can see this here. It's the words are all partially erased. And so you're seeing obscure writing or obscured writing. And then eventually at one point, because she realizes he's erasing everything, she writes a question in stones. And the question is, are you Matthew Rose Sorensen? And that simple question prompts him to think through, like, to realize, prompts a memory of how he got to this place, and ends up eroding all of his trust in the other, and prompting the movement of the story towards its climax. What a cool idea that birds alighting on statues could be communication.
Yeah. It's cool. It's very nicely done.
Another piece about the world creation before we jump into our next kind of bigger approach. This story starts with a quote. It says, "I am the great scholar, the magician, the adept who is doing the experiment. Of course I need subjects to do it on." It's from The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. And that's ultimately what happens to the other. The other is making Piranesi his experiment, is doing things on. This story, and I have looked this up later, and the world creation here is in many ways driven from not just the Library of Babel, but from the Garden of Forking Paths, written by Borges. And this the idea of the Garden of Forking Paths is a labyrinth that encapsulates the past and the future through a written form, and like an invisible.
Also,
sorry, go.
I think the idea of a labyrinth has been, you could find it in many different cultures and histories and myths. And I was thinking explicitly of the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, the labyrinth, which is built by Daedalus, the father of Icarus. And so a lot of, I guess, I was waiting for a Minotaur to appear.
Yeah.
I thought the 16 might be a Minotaur or something. And there are statues of Minotaurs in there, so I felt that was an overt reference. And also the cover of it,
it's Mr. Tumnus.
Looks pretty Greek to me.
It's Mr. Tumnus.
Okay, yes, but Mr. Tumnus is a satyr, which is a Greek. Yeah. So, yeah.
Question for you: is the other the Minotaur?
I mean, I guess technically he's the closest to a Minotaur that you could find in this story. I kept waiting for the labyrinth to have some kind of dark secret or something. But it turns out that the labyrinth in the house is like the good guy. You know. And so I guess you could say the other is like the Minotaur. The Minotaur is not really, what I remember, doesn't really have a mind or an objective other than to eat people. So, you know, it's kind of mindless. The original story of the Theseus and the Minotaur, the people of Athens were compelled by King Minos of Crete to send 14 young noble citizens, 7 men and 7 women, but sometimes kids, to the Labyrinth in Crete to be slaughtered by the Minotaur in the Labyrinth. They were offered as sacrificial victims in retribution for the death of Minos' son, Androgeus. I believe there's like a war involved or something like that. And so, we got from that, we have the Hunger Games and, lots of other things. And Labyrinth. I don't know. There's something. That's what myths are like. They get stuck in your head and reinterpreted and reinterpreted and retold. And in this particular incarnation, the Labyrinth is almost a good place. It's like a place you want to be.
But it is a place that causes you to lose your memory.
That's true.
It's a place that has it. The hidden secret of it is that the more time you spend here, the more you lose yourself.
Right.
And I want that to come up in our conversation as we talk about connection between humans and nature versus humans and science and progress. Mm-hmm. Because as Piranesi loses his connection to the human world, his connection to nature increases. And I think there's something there. We've talked about this, about good books, right? Good books or great books. I don't know, great literature, or good stories. Maybe we're based on stories. So I think good stories prompt many conversations and greater depth. And I really feel like this is one of those types of stories, because I think you can teach a class on this book, because you would bring in, not only the stories we're talking about here, but you'd bring in, what you just named. You could bring in Pan's Labyrinth, right? You could bring in so many other thinking, like, ways to approach this and to talk about this story. I'm realizing that I missed one of the major pieces when you asked me about the creation of the world. I missed the actual way that this world was created. And then we'll move on to the next part of our conversation. As you can tell, I'm a little giddy over here, just because it's so good. So this is the idea of how the world is created according to the prophet. I just keep calling him Arn Sales because that's his last name. And I can't remember it. Lawrence Arn Sales. I'm going to start on page 151. This was the beginning of his most famous idea, the theory of other worlds. Simply put, it said that when knowledge or power went out of this world, it did 2 things. First, it created another place. And second, it left a hole, a door, between this world where it had once existed and the new place it had made. Picture this, said Arn Sales. Like rainwater lying on a field, the next day the field is dry. Where has the rainwater gone? Some has evaporated into the air, some has been drunk by plants and animals, but some has seeped down into the earth. This happens over and over again. For decades, centuries, millennia, the water seeping down makes a crack in the rock under the earth. Then it wears the crack into a hole. Then it wears the hole into a cave entrance, a kind of door, in fact. Beyond the door, the water keeps flowing, and it hollows out caverns and carves out pillars. Somewhere, said Arn Sales, there must be a passage, a door between us and wherever the magic had gone. It might be very small. It might not be entirely stable. Like the entrance to an underground cave, it might be in danger of collapse, but it would be there. And if it was there, it was possible to find. Now going to page 90. Because he's in pursuit of the great and secret knowledge. which is what the other is also looking for. Before I had seen this world, I thought that the knowledge that created it would somehow still be here, lying about, ready to be picked up and claimed. Of course, as soon as I got here, I realized how ridiculous that was. Imagine water flowing underground. It flows through the same cracks year after year, and it wears away at the stone. Millennia later, you have a cave system. But what you don't have is the water that originally created it. That's long gone, seeped away into the earth. Same thing here. There's a lot of work in the. I tried to do a lot of the work, and this is why it took two readings in pretty quick succession to connect parts of this book together. Because you're given knowledge up front that is really important later, and information later that's really important up front. It right. Purposely obfuscates you, just like you named it as a mystery hunter. Mm-hmm. And that's what this book does. And there's a part of me that really wants to take it all and rework it into an orderly account. It even quotes at one point, and I think this is another thing I like about it. Various Matthew Rose Sorensen's journal has lots of different entries, and one of the entries just has a list of different types of thinking or types of stories that are labyrinthine, and the first on the list is on page 164. Timey-wimey, Stephen Moffat, Blink, and J.W. Dunn's Theories of Time. Doctor Who. Stephen Moffat was the director or the writer for Doctor Who.
Okay.
And so that statement, timey-wimey, Stephen Moffat, Blink. Blink is one of the best episodes of Doctor Who. It's about statues that are trying to kill you, and if you blink, they can move incredibly fast. And then timey-wimey, spacey-wacy, timey-wimey, spacey-wacy, is how, was it the 12th Doctor? Yeah. Defines the TARDIS and the movement through space that the TARDIS does, which is the flying blue telephone booth that works as Doctor Who's space-time transporter. And so I always love when things that I love connect with other things that I love. And so that was just a little fun little boop.
Yeah.
Hunter, I'm having so much fun right now.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading this book is how writing itself is a technology. And I think this is one of the most important ideas that I took from Technopoly by Neil Postman, which we'll probably do a podcast on eventually. But just the idea that writing itself is a technology. And I found this in Piranesi, just in the system of his journals. Like, he keeps an index of his journals, which the critical part of me was like, I mean, that's crazy. Who keeps an index of the journals? But also, there are some crazy journalists out there. So it's not like journalists in both sense of the word, who would keep an index of their journal. So, that's fine. But there's a quote where, in my copies of page 161, where he's talking about 16,
Okay.
and whether 16 would hate writing, because he says, oh, if 16 hates reason, then maybe she hates writing. And he says, writing, a medium by which reason can pass from one person to another. And if you think about it, writing is what enables Piranesi to uncover the truth about who he is and about what happened to Matthew Rose Sorensen. So, and I think that this can connect us to the Library of Babel and the Garden of Forking Paths, because the Garden of Forking Paths is... I love Borges. I love that he gets so... It's almost like he's so lost in the story that he doesn't care whether you understand it or not. And that's how I like my fiction. I just like that. That's the thing. Going from Piranesi to Borges, as much as I enjoyed Piranesi, it was definitely meant to be read, and it was an easy read. Not necessarily that easy, but like it read quick. It wasn't, it was written with the reader in mind, or at least edited.
The typical reader is going to read it once, never feel the need to go back to it again. They're going to have read it as a mystery that kind of has a big shock and awe piece that makes them feel ugh about it.
Which I want to be clear is not a bad thing. Like, it's important when you're writing to have the reader in mind.
And hopefully I've already communicated that it does much more than that as well.
Right. Yeah.
But let's go to Borges. Borges is a lot harder. I'm glad that we read short stories of Borges. I'm not sure I could handle long form fiction.
I don't think he could either. I honestly don't think that he wrote like any long form novels. He was just... His mind was just so dense. He just, I love him. So, The Garden of Forking Paths is like this little story told by a Nazi spy, I think.
Yep, I'll be right back.
So he's not a Nazi spy. It's in World War I. So he's a German spy, and I guess that part doesn't matter. But basically, there's a Chinese man, and he encounters this English man who has uncovered the great grandson. Yes, so it's his great grandfather's. Page 22. I'm not sure if we have the same copy of Labyrinth, but
yep.
Yeah. I have some understanding of labyrinths. Not for nothing am I the great-grandson of Xiao Pen, who was governor of Yunnan, and who renounced worldly power in order to write a novel that might be even more populous than the Huang Lu Meng, and to construct a labyrinth in which all men would become lost. 13 years he dedicated to these heterogeneous tasks, but the hand of a stranger murdered him, and his novel was incoherent, and no one found the labyrinth. Beneath English trees I meditated on that lost maze. I imagined it inviolate and perfect at the secret crest of a mountain. I imagined it erased by rice fields or beneath the water. I imagined it infinite, no longer composed of octagonal kiosks, which I believe is a reference to the Library of Babel, and returning paths, but of rivers and provinces and kingdoms. I thought of a labyrinth of labyrinths, of one sinuous spreading labyrinth that would encompass the past and the future and in some way involve the stars. And it turns out he meets this English guy who has solved the riddle of the labyrinth, that the novel that his grandfather was working on is, in fact, Labyrinth. On page 25, he says, the English guy, whose name is Albert, says, "To no one did it occur that the book and the maze were one and the same thing."
Mm.
And this, to me, we're talking about writing as a technology. Having written a couple books, I related very hard to writing being like a labyrinth. In fact, I have this unfinished nonfiction piece where I literally call writing a maze and like a labyrinth, because when you're writing a fiction, as happens he talks about in The Garden of Forking Paths, is that in all fictional works, each time a man is confronted with several alternatives, he chooses one and eliminates the others.
Mm-hmm.
So, you go through a plot, and this was what I struggled with in writing and doing plots, is I would plot something out in bullet points, and then I would be writing the scene, and I'd be like, well, actually that character wouldn't say that or do that, and therefore my planned plot doesn't work. I have to choose another path. So for me, and some people are plotters and some people are gardeners, and for me it felt very much like navigating a maze where you come to a fork or three crossroads, and you choose one, and then you find out it's a dead end and it's not somewhere you want to go, so then you come back and then you try another one, and it's rewriting and writing. And this whole idea is that in The Garden of Forking Paths, in the fiction of Chopin, he chooses simultaneously all of the paths. So the reason they thought the novel was a failure is because it would like contradict himself. Itself. Like some guy would be dead in one chapter, and then later on that guy would be alive in a different chapter. And it's just a really, really intricate and lovely work of fiction that gets into this idea of writing itself being a labyrinth, and time. He talks about time too.
Yeah. The Garden of Forking Paths is an enormous riddle or parable whose theme is time. This recondite cause prohibits its mention. To omit a word always, to resort to inept metaphors and obvious paraphrases, is perhaps the most emphatic way of stressing it. Have you ever done that? Have you ever written something purposely trying to leave out a word? Or I remember I had a teacher once who had us all read a paragraph and asked, like, what's the thing that's missing here? And it was a paragraph written without the letter E. And it's very hard to write a paragraph without the letter E.
Oh, yeah.
You take out the letter E and the letter A, and a lot of English falls apart.
Yeah.
One of the so writing as a technology, I really like that, and I especially as a person who prefers to write my notes handwritten, I have long aspired to have a separate notebook that holds the key, the index to my other notebooks.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually one of the biggest strengths of the computer is it can automatically do that for you. Like the Control F function is one of, if I could Control F my own writings, like in physical paper, like it would be incredible.
Yeah. But the thing is, the thing is, like, about writing is in Technopoly, Neil Postman starts out with the judgment of Talmus, I believe, where he talks about writing as a technology, and he says this is not a good thing because you will have people who, instead of relying on their own resources, will demonstrate the conceit of knowledge.
The conceit of knowledge?
The conceit of knowledge. And what he means by that, I think, is like the appearance of knowledge. So, like, because we can write things down, we don't have to remember as much.
Yeah.
And if you think about ancient philosophers who weren't writing, who were orating, you know, they had to remember everything.
Yep.
And you think about the Iliad and the Odyssey, I think the leading majority theory now is that they were passed down as oral stories before they were ever written down. And so you have storytellers who are retelling it and remembering, you know, the entirety of these stories. And that's a feat that we would think is impossible, but we think it's impossible because we have writing, because we don't have to practice memory and logic and reason, and it's very interesting.
Once upon a midnight dreary, as I wandered weak and weary over many a quaint and query volume of forgotten lore. I mean, this is why rhyme schemes exist partially too, right? And I think the Iliad and Odyssey like utilized a basic rhyme scheme too, didn't many of the versions in terms of memorization?
I think they have rhyme schemes, but it's still thousands of lines of.
That's not. That does not diminish the skill set, but then you could say like the poem itself is in its own form of technology.
Language.
Yeah, and like a part of technology is also a type of thing that people use to weaponize against others. So not only like the conceit of knowledge, my brain is also like, how do we weaponize that knowledge against others? And like, and a great example of that in this story is the other weaponizes his knowledge,
right,
of like the world and of interactions and like memory against Piranesi time and time again. Like he throws out the word Battersea to see if Piranesi can catch on this.
Which is where Piranesi was abducted.
Mm-hmm. How do you see writing as a technology in the Library of Babel? Like in one way, it's incredibly obvious. But I'm wondering if you can, if you've got additional thoughts on that.
I do. So, I always have additional thoughts.
Just can I set the Library of Babel is a story about an individual or a theorized library where people are wandering around. It's a combination. It's just an infinite library with every combination of letters in every combination of books that has ever been written or could be written. Kind of think to yourself as an infinite number of monkeys sitting in an infinite number of rooms, writing an infinite number of stories that all have a finite number of pages. And then they hit enter at the same time, and they all put them on a shelf and walk away.
And the craziest thing is that the Library of Babel is actually exists.
Yes,
online.
Yes, it does.
You can go to the website.
I actually had it saved on my last laptop.
Yeah.
Those are my bookmarks.
Yeah, because there are a finite number of combinations based on this lettering system.
It's a near infinite number.
Yeah, near infinite number, but not infinite. Yep. And what I think about when I think of writing as technology, I think of, because of our history, I think, and our culture and context, we tend to think of writing as the technology of reason and logic and clear thinking. But I think when you take writing and carry it to its extreme, it's really the opposite in a way, because the Library of Babel, what happens is people realize that every book that could be written has already been written. What that means is there is the true story of your own death somewhere out there. There's something that contains the answer to life and the meaning of everything, everywhere. Yes, every scientific discovery, philosophical, religious, everything has been written, and this means all we have to do is go and find it. But this also means that for every coherent sentence, there are billions and trillions of incoherent sentences.
Yeah.
And this is the problem with writing and with the internet and this virtual world that we're creating for ourselves. Is, he says on page 58, the certitude that everything has been written negates us or turns us into phantoms. And this, to me, is what Dostoevsky does in Notes from Underground, and I think to a certain extent what C.S. Lewis does in that Hideous Strength, is he takes these ideas that people are all excited about and he carries them to the extreme, and he says, no, this is what happens. It turns us into phantoms because instead of relying on our own resources and trying to discover truth, we just scroll through the Library of Babel and try to find it randomly, or we put prompts and ask an AI, which is an AI is just scrolling for you, and we become phantoms that don't actually think because we're just trying to use our technology to find the answer. It's not that you cannot use writing as a tool, but which, like Piranesi uses it as a tool. But this is what happens if we carry it to the extreme.
Yeah. I love taking ideas to the extreme because it's to me one of maybe the best way to figure out if they hold any value.
Right.
To me, this question of human morality, like, what's the goal of being moral or kind to somebody without a big capital T truth that you're holding to? But without that, then why should anybody be kind to anybody? And like, oh well, it's just a good thing to do. Like, yeah, but why?
Yeah.
It's just a random snippet of a thought experiment.
Well, that's one of the first questions we learn to ask. Why? Right?
Yep. So the Library of Babel, the Garden of Forking Paths, and the house are all infinite or near infinite. To a human's lifetime and ability to walk, they are all infinite. And that is one real clear connection between all of them. A large idea of Piranesi came from, or at least was influenced by, impacted by the writings of Borges. And now I'm trying to think about how do we connect this more specifically to that hideous strength. And I have got thoughts, but you brought up a term earlier called, and I think this is a term of your own origin.
Yeah.
You called it algorithmic paganism. And I think you were looking at some of the similar, maybe the same passages I shared earlier, in a different light, and saw a connection with that hideous strength. Can you get that started?
Yeah. So that hideous strength, the basic plot is that there is C.S. Lewis called it like a fairy tale. He didn't even call it science fiction, but
Yes. Very
he
explicitly. That's how he
yes,
starts.
yeah, and basically there's an organization called NICE, NICE, National Institute for
National Institute of Coordinated Experiments.
National Institute of Coordinated Experiments. And their goal, it's funny when the main character sort of gets inundated into this. He's trying to figure out what exactly he's trying to do, and he just can't. Because nobody knows what they're trying to do.
It's infuriating to read.
Yeah.
It's so stressful.
It's so fun. But the basically is just progress, scientific progress. They're trying to, make life more efficient and
Less messy.
easier to live and less messy.
Less human.
Yeah, and ultimately less human, because they're basically trying to commit genocide on the whole human race, except for like a couple heads in a jar that are going to be heads indefinitely, brains existing in jars.
Yep.
Is the way I understood it. And the way that they want to bring this about is they want to find the body of Merlin, because they believe that Merlin is still alive and that Merlin will be on their side because Merlin can talk. He comes from a time where men, a pre-rational state, as that basically the exact power that Arne Sales was talking about, that he theorized would exist.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a pre-rational state, he thought that you could, actually talk to the animals and make things happen, and the world would talk back, and you'd have these powers. Nice thinks that by resurrecting Merlin, they can get these powers and then use those powers to carry out their plan. And so I guess I'm sort of sensitive to paganism. Partly because I'm a Christian, but also, I'm one of those Christians who sort of tightens up when I hear other Christians start talking about demons and hell and that kind of stuff, because I think like we talked about in our Baldwin episode, I think that real demonic powers and the real powers of evil, they operate in ways that don't seem evil.
They often.
That they often do, So it's not that I don't think they don't exist. It's that I just think that, this sort of exorcism things that people talk about are kind of a smokescreen for the real evil that goes on. That's happening right now. But I'll date my sensitivity to paganism to when I watched Midsummer, which came out not too long ago, but several years ago. Not a bad movie, but one that I hated watching. That did things to me I don't like. That is basically people going into a pagan society and everybody but one person gets sacrificed.
Oh man.
Yeah. So, and I've also noticed, I feel like paganism is like sort of cool. It's like making a comeback somehow in culture. You see people talking about, I don't know, pagan rituals, and it's not. Anyway, and so I was noticing it in Piranesi, and this idea, and what I think it really comes from, is the fact that we live in a super rational society, and that I think because postmodern life has destroyed the foundations of tradition and history that we that humans have relied on, you know, to give us a sense of purpose and belonging and history, roots, because all of that has been attacked and deconstructed,
Yeah.
and a lot of that rightfully so, you know. But we feel like we're missing something, you know, and so I think that's why this return to like pre-rational thought is attractive. And my prediction when I was reading Piranesi, I think I was on page 150 thereabouts. I hadn't reached the big reveal yet. I made this prediction that, like, if I was plotting this book, I would be like, okay, Piranesi is going to revert to paganism, and he's going to get the powers that Arn Sales is talking about, and he's going to use those powers to, you know, overthrow Ketterly and Arn Sales and like get his freedom. That was my idea. And I'm going really roundabout. I'm sorry. But so we have this one part. That's where the paganism part comes in, obviously. And I got algorithmic from the quote on page 121, where he's talking about how the house like plants ideas in his mind. The way that he can know words,
yes,
that don't exist in his world, that don't exist in the house. Words like university and garden. And he's like, for example, I know that a garden is a place where one can refresh oneself with the sight of plants and trees. But a garden is not a thing that exists in the world, nor is there any statue representing that particular idea. Instead, there are statues scattered about in which people are gods. Beasts are surrounded by roses, strands of ivy, trees. In the ninth vestibule, there's a statue of a gardener digging. And in the 19th Southeastern Hall, there's a statue of a different gardener pruning a rose bush. It is from these things that I deduce the idea of a garden. I do not believe that this happens by accident. This is how the house places new ideas gently and naturally in the minds of men. This is how the house increases my understanding. And I'm going to read this because I think it's relevant. This realization is very encouraging, and I no longer feel quite so alarmed when a nonsensical word in my journal gives rise to a mental image that I cannot account for. Do not be anxious, I tell myself. It is the house. It is the house enlarging your understanding. And this, to me, was... I said, oh, this is exactly what we do with our phones. And the algorithm. And I have struggled with watching a lot of YouTube. And I think a lot of us have struggled with social media. And it's no secret that there are algorithms that are designed to feed you content that you will watch, because the more you watch, the more ads they can show you, the more money they make. They don't have any, corporation doesn't have any moral reason, and it's not, benevolent like the house. Their only motivation, no matter what they say, the structure of their organization is to make money. That is what drives them. So, I was thinking about algorithmic paganism and this idea that, like, in the house can plant these things in your mind naturally, and it's good for you, and it can increase your understanding. And it's hard for me not to see a dark side to that. And I guess if you're extrapolating, and I I will say I am not a great religious scholar by any means. I have not studied paganism, and I think paganism itself is a huge topic with like unimaginable amounts of histories and traditions that you can go into. But um, you know, sticking to this idea of like looking to nature um, for inspiration and ideas and trusting the world. I think, in Christian theology, you have a benevolent God and a loving God who makes creation, that you can, discover his natural attributes from his creation. But at the same time, if you worship the creation instead of the creator, it's going to lead you down darker paths, and you're going to be misled. And certainly, if you worship the images that humans have made, and if you take what's on your screen as part of nature, that's there are so many different motives behind what people put on screens that it can really lead you, astray. So this is a huge can of worms. I'll pass it to you, Eric.
I love that this conversation can go in many different directions. and I hope the connection between these two books, That Hideous Strength and Piranesi, doesn't feel forced to you. I think I could respond directly to what's happening within the world, but that's not the point of the conversation you're bringing up. Yeah. What I want to add to the discussion is communicating, or the goals and the objectives and the outcomes of the various parties, of the four parties that are at work between Piranesi and That Hideous Strength. And I'm going to need a little bit of your help, Hunter, because you've more recently done the thorough deep dive of That Hideous Strength than I have. I've gone through it, but I haven't done the deep dive again. But I'm going to start with Piranesi. This is page 147 in my copy. This is in the section where Piranesi is reading through his notes that he wrote as Matthew Sorensen. He says this: Lawrence Arne Sales began with the idea that the ancients had a different way of relating to the world, that they experienced it as something that interacted with them. When they observed the world observed them back. If, for example, they traveled in a boat on a river, then the river was in some way aware of carrying them on its back and had in fact agreed to it. When they looked up to the stars, the constellations were not simply patterns enabling them to organize what they saw. They were vehicles of meaning, a never-ending flow of information. The world was constantly speaking to ancient man. All of this was more or less within the bounds of conventional philosophical history. But where Arne Sales diverged from his peers was in his insistence that this dialogue between the ancients and the world was not simply something that happened in their heads. It was something that happened in the actual world. The way the ancients perceived the world was the way the world truly was. This gave them extraordinary influence and power. Reality was not only capable of taking part in a dialogue, intelligible and articulate, it was also persuadable. Nature was willing to bend to men's desires, to lend them its attributes. Seas could be parted, men could turn into birds and fly away, or into foxes and hide in dark woods. Castles could be made out of clouds. Eventually, the ancients ceased to speak and listen to the world. When this happened, the world did not simply fall silent. It changed. Those aspects of the world that had been in constant communication with men, whether you call them energies, powers, spirits, angels, or demons, no longer had a place or reason to stay, and so they departed. There was, in Arnsal's view, an actual and real disenchantment. And then he says, he had experimented with ritual magic and now thought it might be possible to get some of the powers back, providing you had a physical link with the person who had once possessed them. The best sort of link would be actual remains, the body or part of the body of the person in question. And he ends up finding the head of Adidamarus, who was a magician. And that is what gives him the information through some really creepy ritual to think about this pre-rational thought to then be able to enter into the labyrinth. Hunter, does this connect with you and that hideous strength?
Yes. Yeah. The body of Merlin, and I believe the head, the literal head of the sort of
society.
The nice society. They have this head of an old magician. I was trying to find the name.
I have it as Francois Alcassan.
Yes, Alcassan's head.
You mean the man who was guillotined? Gasped Mark. Both the heads nodded. Both faces were close to him. In that disastrous light, they looked like masks hanging in the air.
Oh, it's like a horror novel, this book. I just loved it.
This book takes some returns.
They have a literal head that is like they're keeping alive. They think they're keeping alive with like tubes and air and saliva, artificial saliva and stuff like that. And Arnsales gets ahead, and I believe he tries to use the head and they refuse, and then a bunch of students demonstrate and they're like, "Free the head, free the head."
They break into the science museum or one of the museums.
Yeah. It's kind of fascinating that you have this reoccurring in 2020. And what occurred to me is I was also thinking about Jesus and how Jesus speaks to the waves and quiets the storm when the disciples are on a boat and Jesus is sleeping. They wake him up and Jesus tells the waves to stop. And this idea that we've lost some kind of power over nature, which is also going all the way back to Adam and the idea that we were set up as kind of like rulers of nature.
Yeah, stewards. Yeah, and this is one of the things that fascinated me so much about that hideous strength, and it's a reason why we'll probably talk about it in greater detail at a different point. It theorizes through a fairy tale a different interaction between humans and nature that Piranesi then kind of adds to and thinks about it as this great knowledge. And so you have these two different parties, one in each book, Nice in the one, in that hideous strength, and Ketterly, and then Arnsales before him, or the other and the prophet. Pursuing knowledge or pursuing this ancient connection at the cost of human life, for the selfish goals, similar but not the same reasons. Neither of which are moralistic, and both of which have strained from any care of human life. And then you have You have two other characters. You have Piranesi, in Piranesi. Brilliant. And you have what's the name? What would you call? What's the other group called in that hideous string with the director? The people at St. Anne's.
People at St. Anne's, yeah. You got the director and Jane and the Denistons and the Dimbos.
And the bear.
Miss Mags and McPhee.
Yes. And so Piranesi, in many ways, begins the journey towards this ancient mindset. And I put forth my evidence earlier in his connection and interaction with the birds. And the story ends, and this is part of your argument. I don't know if you brought it up. I can't remember. But its story ends with Piranesi seeing some interacting with people, and he says this. It's one of the last things he shares. When faced with a person or situation I do not understand, my first impulse is still to look for a statue that will enlighten me. And then skipping forward to the last couple pages, and it's under "It began to snow." Entry for 1st of December 2018. He says, and he passes two people. And the first one, he pauses so he isn't able to connect with them. But he wanted to seize hold of him and say to this man, that in another world you are a king, noble and good. I have seen it. As a statue. And then a woman passed me with two children. One of the children had a wooden recorder in his hands. I knew them too. They are depicted in the 27th Southern Hall, a statue of two children laughing, one of them holding a flute. I think he's actually beginning a little bit of this journey towards the ancient knowledge. I actually think if he'd stayed in the house long term, I think he might have been able to fly. I think that's a full possibility. That the story opens as not an impossibility. It's I think it's unlikely. But then you have and maybe what makes him different, Piranesi different, is he does not think that the pursuit of the secret knowledge that the other and before him Arn Sales are seeking is worth it, is a worthwhile endeavor. And so he kind of ends on that process, and by way of doing that, kind of receives a certain aspect of it. This is, again, we're building, this is a fantasy world, right? This is very purposely a fantasy world. And then you have Ransom, or the director, who is in a completely different space. He has received it through his relationship with God. And there's some incredibly beautiful scenes where you can see the interaction of nature and humans together. Like one of the very first ones Jane experiences, Ransom's eating bread and drinking wine. We can talk about communion in a future episode. And he drops 3 pieces of bread on the floor, or small pieces, and then blows a whistle, and 3 mice come to grab them, and then run back. And he says something along the lines of, see this beautiful connection. Like, I didn't need that food. It was going to be a loss and a mess. And these animals. Oh, here he says this. I found it. Page 147. There, he said, a very simple adjustment. Humans want crumbs removed. Mice are anxious to remove them. It ought never to have been a cause of war. And so I think that hideous strength is presenting this other way
Mm-hmm.
towards that hidden knowledge, which is not a pursuit of the knowledge at all,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a pursuit of the one who grants it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this idea that humans can, through progress, get everything they want and pursue everything, and that progress is only ever good. And to a certain degree, Nice is about that. Ketterly is not about that. He thinks that there's a point where progress like made a mistake and that there is a point in going back.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he's still all about himself and his own pride and getting it for his own well-being. And the other takes that, Ketterly, really expands that from Arn Sales. And yet the way this secret or hidden knowledge, the ability to fly, the ability to talk with animals, the ability that as you're doing something, that nature would be responding to you, that hideous strength puts up as being a gift that comes from God or Elendil, I think is the language that Ransom specifically has through the angelic type characters. And Merlin also has a similar type of strength. And I just think that's such a fascinating. I think that's such a cool way of bringing these stories together. It's also fully possible that these stories happen in the same universe, and I actually really like fantasy stories that are driven. You explicitly shared that you didn't like this. I'm on the other side. I really like fantasy stories that are driven out of a space of reality of, this could happen. Mm-hmm. Like it's connected to the world. This is, I think, one of the reasons why people love Narnia so much is because, as kids, you're already creating these mythical worlds. Well, what if one of the worlds that you kind of pretend like actually exists?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's a lot of literature about that. There's a lot of books just like that. There's a whole nother conversation we can have. I'm not sure either of us are prepared for it about, the difference between Eastern and Western thought. I've started to try to read the Tao Te Ching, and our world really is dominated by Western thought, traditions of Western thought, reason, logic, the scientific method. But Eastern thought is really quite different. Like the first line of the Tao Te Ching is Tao Ke Tao Fei Chang Tao. It's like the Tao, the truth. Tao is the Tao that you can define is not the ever-present Tao. Is not the truth. The truth that you can define and understand is not the true truth. Or you could say, the word, if we're looking at a Christian concept of this, is like, in the first chapter of John's Gospel is the Word of God. The Word was, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. All things were created through the Word, this logos, truth. These ways of thinking that, I think really try to go beyond language to the actual truth, because language is a technology, and it's
truth predated language.
Mm-hmm.
But also, biblical, from a Christian perspective, the word is truth.
Yes, but when the word is not necessarily referring to language, like word is not literally word. The English translations that we use the word, but the Greek word logos means something kind of different.
Yeah.
You know.
Hunter, by way of landing this plane, let me bring up a part of this story that we didn't touch on at all. And that's what happens post-climax. So there's a climactic moment, or really the climax and afterwards. Climactic moment of this story, which is about 250 pages, takes 5 pages at most to tell. Cataly is trying to kill, at that moment, both Piranesi and 16, who you find out is Raphael. He has a gun, and he ends up drowning. And I feel like a lot of stories after the climactic moment, they kind of just fizzle out. Like, it happened, let's end the story. That's not what the story does. In fact, there's, an additional, 1/6 of the book or so is post-climactic moment, and it's interactions between Raphael, as she's trying to help Piranesi, Matthew Rose Sorensen, try to figure out not only who he is a little bit, but like if he's going to come back to the human world. And I thought you would really appreciate this. Just because I know that you enjoy when stories give beautiful tidbits of information to better understand a character. That not just trying to, not words for the sake of words. But there's a moment, it's page 236. Matthew Rose Sorensen is back, and he's being interviewed by another police officer who's trying to figure out what happened to Ketterly. And they kind of just talk about Raphael a little bit and how Raphael's an extraordinary person. She's amazing, isn't she? Of course she can be a little, she doesn't really, he fishes in the air with his fingers to catch the elusive world. She's not necessarily the easiest person in the world to work with. In time management, definitely not her thing. But honestly, we all think the world of her. It is right to think the world of Raphael, I tell him. She is an extraordinary person. Exactly. Did anyone ever tell you about Penny Wheeler? No, I say. Who or what is Penny Wheeler? And then this random police officer tells like a page story about Raphael interacting and like taking down, a person who is just troubled, and it's completely unnecessary. And I think, and many people would think it's a waste of, like, why would you even have that piece? I just thought it was what I wrote. I wrote, completely unnecessary, wonderful tangent that helps us better understand Raphael. Mm-hmm. I just thought it was just a nice little, just beautiful little nugget that was kind of thrown there at the end of the story. Did you appreciate that, or was that kind of frustrating to you?
I don't know if it was frustrating. I thought it was neat. In the part about where he says, the officer's like, pretty brave, don't you think? And he says, braver than you think. She doesn't like heights.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting that Raphael likes the house, and and in fact, Piranesi is kind of worried about her. He says, he knows that she returns to the Labyrinth often. On page 242.
Yeah.
The quiet and the solitude attract her. She hopes to find what she needs. It worries me. Don't disappear, I tell her sternly. Do not disappear. And I think that speaks to what you are talking about, is this longing that we have for another world.
Yeah, we do. And yet, Raphael names it after she talks about the beauty of this world. Raphael asks Piranesi to show him the world, the labyrinth, and he shows her the place, and she talks about how beautiful it is. Talking about a world that we long for. And she says it's beautiful. And then she says immediately, or shortly afterwards, I know I'm looking at it, but I can't find it. That, well, I say it's beautiful, but it's not fully beautiful, because death and murder have found their way here. And I think what we ultimately long for is a world without that death. Mm-hmm. Hunter, thank you for reading this and the other stories with me.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing them. I had a lot of fun, maybe a little too much fun, getting lost in the labyrinths. I think it's, I think our own minds are labyrinths, That Baldwin's refrain that Socrates said that, the unexamined life is not worth living. It's,
yeah.
We need to examine ourselves, because we are a labyrinth unto ourselves.
It's always amazing to me that conversations around books that have, they have encouraging points, are by no means all, or maybe even mostly encouraging. In terms of reading abductions and murders and attempted genocide and destruction of the world and destruction of knowledge and hatred towards others and murder, can prompt conversations that are, while not always uplifting, like filling. And hopefully pointing us towards something even more fulfilling along the way. Entry for 30 November 2018. In my mind are all the tides, their seasons, their ebbs and their flows. In my mind are all the halls, the endless procession of them, the intricate pathways. When this world becomes too much for me, when I grow tired of the noise and the dirt and the people, I close my eyes and I name a particular vestibule to myself. Then I name a hall. I imagine I am walking the path from the vestibule to the hall. I note with precision the doors I must pass through, the rights and lefts that I must take, the statues on the walls that I must pass. Last night I dreamt that I was standing in the 5th Northern Hall facing the statue of the gorilla. The gorilla dismounted from his plinth and came towards me with a slow knuckle walk. He was gray-white in the moonlight, and I flung my arms around his massive neck and told him how happy I was to be home. When I awoke, I thought, I am not home. I am here.